Hi, and welcome again. My guest today is Aaron Sen from England. He has more trips to the Middle East than I can count. He has also visited Jebel El Laws in Saudi Arabia, dived numerous times in the Red Sea, been part of research teams, worked with more known authors such as Jonathan Gray and Lennart Møller, and he has, of course, traveled with Ron Wyatt. And he even helped me to improve my English and even translated some of my work. So, welcome to you, Aaron.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah. There's so much more I could have added to the intro, but I had to keep it short. Um, you have most certainly been blessed in the way that you have so far lived an amazing life compared to others. So let's start at the beginning. Did you come from a religious family? What is your background?
Not really, no. I mean, officially, my mother's Irish, so we were kind of brought up Roman Catholic. Not really. We weren't really taught anything from the Bible, but we might go to church on Sundays and that kind of thing. But it was never taken very seriously. So,
Mm.
when I became a teenager and so forth, I had some idea of some basic Bible stories like the Christmas story or Noah's Ark or um, that kind of thing, that Jesus died on the cross, but it was very minimal and it didn't really play much of a part in my life at that time.
You hadn't thought about spiritual things or been interested personally when you grew up, or
No, really not. In fact, you know, it's strange how you remember tiny segments of the earliest periods of your life and you wonder why they stayed in your memory. Because I
mm.
remember being probably, let me see, it must be 6 or 7 years old. And in school, we started learning about cavemen. And I went home to my mum. I was so young, and I said, "Well, was Adam and Eve cavemen?" And she said, "No, of
Mm.
course not." And I had just learned that cavemen were, it's a fact. That's how we started out. And I said, "Well, in that case, there's
Right.
no such thing as Adam and Eve." And I remember in a short time, whether it was a couple of hours or a couple of days, I remember going back to my mum and saying, "I don't believe in God anymore. And I don't believe in,
Oh no.
yeah, I said, I don't believe in God anymore. And I said, I don't believe in ghosts and I don't believe in anything." So
Oh.
all I remember is speaking those words. I can't really remember how I felt or anything, but I was really young. And so
Oh
at that
wow.
point on, I was pretty atheistic actually and just not interested. So as I said, I was
Mm.
probably like 6 years old or something because I remember which class I was in at school.
Mm. I guess that shows how much what you're being taught at school can affect you.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you're taught all these things as a
Yeah.
very young child. You're taught conflicting things about Adam and Eve and as well as cavemen. And,
Mm.
you're taught Adam and Eve more as a sort of a myth or a legend. You're taught cavemen as a more of a
Yeah.
scientific approach. And so what's a child going to do, obviously? You're just steered in that direction, aren't you?
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. So, how did your life turn towards a faith again?
I probably was searching, but in a way which I didn't recognize at the time. I was probably about 24 years old and I was living in London. Let's see, I'm 46 now, so I'm going back a long time. And
Yeah.
um, I was actually into martial arts at the time, and I was going more towards kind of Tai Chi and meditation, but I wasn't really into it. I just maybe started reading it a bit. So I was probably
Mm.
going more towards spiritual things and just pure fighting and self-defense and that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I remember just walking along the street in London. I was with my girlfriend at the time, and I just saw a poster which said Noah's Ark discovered. And as I said before, I knew what Noah's Ark was. So I read the page and it said Sodom and Gomorrah, the Red Sea crossing, the Mount Sinai, and the Ark of the Covenant discovered. And I didn't know what any of those things were. I never heard of them before in my life. But I knew what Noah's Ark was, and I was kind of vaguely interested in mysteries and this kind of thing. So I said to my girlfriend, let's go along because it's only down the road. So we did. We got on the bus that day and we got to the address. And as we were walking towards the address, I realized it was a church. And I saw, some people gathered around the door and everything. And I just said to her, just keep walking, keep walking. It's in a church. I'm not going into a church. Yeah. I said, there's no way I'm going into a church. They're all crazy guys. So I just said, keep walking. So we walked to the end of the road. And then, we had to turn around to get the bus back. So we turned around and we had to walk back past the church to get back on the bus. And it's strange. I just said, okay, well, maybe we'll just go in, but stand by the door. Don't sit down. And that way, if you stand by the door, we can just leave. So we went in, and the church, she was in North London. The church was completely full. And we ended up taking a seat. And then we sat through the whole thing. We sat through all the questions at the end. We went back the next night, the next night, the next night, and the next night. 4 nights in a row. I was too afraid to walk into the church at first, and then in the end, you couldn't get me out of there just within 1 week. And the material was so powerful. That's what it does to someone who's not agnostic, but actually hostile about church and so forth. And it just, within literally 1 week, I'll say hooked, if I can use that word, And I just wanted to know everything. I think that was around 1995. Yeah, it really was an amazing time.
Yeah. So where did you go from then? Because you got to know a lot of people who was working on this archaeological discoveries, and even Ron Wyatt who found them. How did you go from the meeting to getting in touch with all these people?
Yeah, I guess just one point. I do remember sitting in those meetings, and the speaker actually was Jonathan Gray, who you mentioned earlier. And I remember him saying, now we've all heard of, we've all seen the movie, The Exodus or something. I forget the famous movie about the 10 Commandments, that's it. And we all know the story of the Red Sea crossing. But now we've got this evidence. And I was thinking, I've never seen that movie and I don't know that story at all. I was so ignorant of the Bible. And yet I kept going back and it all seemed to, even though I almost didn't know what they were talking about, it really grabbed my heart. And so, I just think all these things were, just so, I don't know how to word it, cleverly created by God to grasp the attention of someone who's not just not interested, but actually hostile towards these things. They're just very divinely crafted to get your attention. And so where did I go from there?
Well, I just first I want to say that that's what makes maybe your story very amazing, because it shows, the effect that these things can have on someone with your background.
And one thing that I always remember as I went round, I did actually end up going round with Ron Wyatt, and for about 3.5 years, sitting in on most of his presentations as he travelled around the world. And one thing, I was just thinking this a couple of days ago. I was walking down the street, I was thinking about the people in the audience that would put their hands up and they'd say, well, of course, we don't need all these things, all these evidences, because we already believe in the Bible, as if it's a scathing rebuke to say, you should have faith without these things. And Ron Wyatt, in his sort of quiet manner, would say, well, excuse me all to pieces, but we don't all have your faith, and there are other people on the planet besides you, and they might need these things. They might need these things, even if you don't. And
you needed it.
Exactly. I could really relate to that comment that he would, the way he replied to those sort of things, because that really was me.
Because you might never have gone into a church if it had been some other topic like
absolutely never.
Theological seminar or something like that.
Yeah.
You'd probably never walk into that church.
Exactly. You know, it's just because
Yeah.
there was an element of mystery and Noah's Ark, or ancient history and this kind of thing. So it just grabbed my attention. It was just enough, just to get me through the doors, and then you couldn't get me out again.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But where did I go from there? Well, yeah, I was very interested. I was asking questions, and the speaker, Jonathan Gray, alluded to the Book of Revelation in one of his final presentations, and mentioned end time prophecy and the mark of the beast. And I guess as a young man with a bit of a television mind, you know, these things seemed quite fascinating to me. So I actually went home and read the Book of Revelation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so none of it made sense to me. So I went back the next day and I queued up at the end to ask questions. And I just said to Jonathan, sorry, I'm just thinking because I remember being so shy at the time. I actually didn't queue up and ask. I actually asked my girlfriend at the time if she would go up and ask. But anyway,
Okay.
and I said, you know, what's the beast in Revelation 12? It says, or whatever it was, you know, there's a dragon coming up out of the sea and the earth and these beasts. And what is all that? Because these things don't exist in real life. And he said, well, they're symbols of different world powers at different times in Earth's history, and particularly the end of the world. And he said, if you're interested, there's another brother which is going to present these things in a week's-long seminar afterwards, or whatever, you know, however long this program was. And so it was someone else then that took over from Jonathan after he left and started to present prophecy and eschatology and end-time events and Mark of the Beast and, you know, the New World Order and all these things. So then I really got studying those. And different things were introduced. I think probably the most important thing I learned in that time was that you look at the Bible alone, you know, it's inspiration.
Yeah.
And it was just fascinating to me as a young man to realize that entire religious world systems are built on complete fallacies. I mean, you know, if you were really to use the Bible as your only rule of faith, there's so many things, offices and institutions and churches and organizations and ceremonies and so forth, which just completely don't appear in the Bible. They're not there at all. They're completely man-made. And in fact, many of them completely contradict what the Bible says. And so I was just completely fascinated by the way the Bible told you to almost do exactly the opposite of everything that the religions, or the Christianity as an organized religion, was doing. And so, of course, there was a little bit of controversy for me as a young man to get my teeth into as well. And as I started to take my new knowledge, you know, out and talk to street preachers and so forth, I found that it's unbelievable. I was maybe a Christian for 6 months or something, and these seasoned street preachers or whoever, these pastors and ministers and so forth, they couldn't answer the most simple questions which I had at my fingertips just because I had the Bible text in front of me. So it was really an amazing time for me, I must say.
So you got a lot of knowledge very fast.
I suppose I had a good Bible teacher, and I was absorbing it all. You know, I would in those days, it was videos that we used to buy and go through prophecy seminars, or, you know, various things, doctrinal studies on Sabbath and things like that. So yeah, I was a little sharper in those days, and I could absorb more information. So yeah, I was really interested.
Yeah. And you got in touch with Ron. How did that happen?
It was really the days before the internet was around and email and that kind of thing. I think I got in touch with him. It was only a few months after, probably in 1996, and I would call him, and he was, you know, he traveled a lot, but he was always on the end of his phone when he was at home, he used to sit by his phone. That's where he would just sit and rest, and he would just pick it up. And eventually I went to his house and I realized that it would just ring every few seconds almost, and he would be there to answer all his calls.
Wow.
So yeah, it was nice that he kind of personal touch on his ministry, and he didn't just have a secretary or something. But anyway, yeah, I called him a number of times, questions about discoveries and so forth, and he always took the time to answer them. He'd probably answered them 100 times before, but still he was very patient with me. And I said to him one day, "Can I help?" I said, I can't. I said I can't do anything. I don't have any skills.
Yeah.
I don't have a scientific background or archaeology or media or anything like that. But I just said, maybe I could do some chores for you, and that would free you up to do your ministry work. I literally said maybe I could clean your house and do your shopping, and
Okay.
I don't know, do some administrative things if you could teach me, and that way you'd have more time. And he actually took me seriously. I couldn't believe it, and he said, "Well, I'm coming over to England in whatever it was, a couple of weeks or a couple of months," which I already knew. So he said maybe we could meet and talk about that. So I was actually invited along on that UK tour. So I got to know Ron quite well, and we travelled Ireland and England and Scotland and Wales. And by the end of it, he said, "Why don't you come along to the Middle East?" Because he was due to fly straight to the Middle East and do a sort of a tour for people of the discoveries. He says, then you can get to see these things for yourself. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember first meeting you, and that was in 1996, actually,
Okay.
at the end of the year, on the top floor. And I remember we could see directly at the three great pyramids in Giza. So I guess we were in Giza, right outside Cairo.
Okay.
And Ron Wyatt introduced us up there. So
yeah, that's where you've
that
got
was
a better
actually
memory than me.
1996.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I remember that very well, actually.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, it was 96. Oh yes, you're right. There was two tours back to back. The first tour was an American tour, and the second tour was your tour. I think it was Norwegians or Europeans. And I think there was a dive on that trip, maybe afterwards or something. That would have been probably the first time I dived. But yes, you're right. End of 96.
Right.
Yeah. A long time ago.
Yes, 22 years ago now, I think.
Is it really?
So yeah, we're old now.
Yeah, we are.
Okay. So so you obviously traveled a lot with Ron in the Middle East and in England. So what's the most important thing you learned when you traveled with him?
Oh dear, the most important thing I learned is, I'm kind of a guy, or at least I used to be, that was very much into just all the facts and figures. And I thought you could win people over just by proving facts and figures, and when they couldn't answer, you've kind of, you've got them cornered intellectually, and they just have to agree with you. But anyway, over the years, I realised that people are a little more emotive than that, and it's not really the best way. But so, in answering that, typically I would have said in the past it was some sort of facts and figures that I learned from him, about, say, Noah's Ark or something like that. But actually, Ron Wyatt is the one person in my entire life, still to date, that made biggest impression on me. And it's hard to define, especially in words. But he had spirit about him. Maybe you could just call it his personality. If you, he had something about him which is indefinable, but still, it made the biggest impression on me. He is the person which has influenced me the most in my life. So I think what I learned most from him is that thing, whatever you want to call it, his character or whatever. He was extremely humble, especially considering, the claims that he made, to find the Ark of the Covenant, the blood of Jesus and the tables of stone. And he was around people that believed him. I know there are plenty of critics which don't believe him. But when you're constantly around people that believe you, on these tours and in these meetings, then they will hold you in very high esteem. And so I know not everyone in the world held him in high esteem, but when he was around those people which did hold him in high esteem, he was immensely humble. And I think I've even heard it from people that haven't met him, but they've seen his video or something on YouTube. And in the comments box, he'll say, "What a very humble man," and so forth. So he had this humility about him and this kindness, which you could see in his eyes. You could, kindness is you need some money and they'll give you some money or whatever it is. But with Ron, you could see the kindness in his eyes, in his expression, and of course in his behaviour as well. And the words that he would speak to you, when you need some comforting words and so forth. But with all of that, he still maintained an amount of authority, which is a hard balance. It's hard to be an authoritative figure as well as humble. I think people often mess that one up. But he seemed to have it.
Yeah, that's a very difficult combination.
Yeah, but he seemed to have it, and without trying, it was just part of his natural persona or whatever. So I think that's his character. If I can just answer the question, his character is what I learned most from Ron Wyatt.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, because you knew him just as well.
That for me too. That is what that was. It gave me for me too. That gave a bigger impression than the discoveries themselves. To be honest,
That's
but
exactly
a lot of negative things. Yeah, a lot of negative things have been said about him. Where people have described his personality and his character in a very bad way. They say he's arrogant, that he's big-headed, that he doesn't have much knowledge, and so how do you feel when you hear accusations like that, or have you heard them?
Yeah, I've heard them, but I'll say a couple of things. The first thing, on a personal level, is that one thing I've noticed is that when you travel with someone, you get to know them more. So you travel with someone for 2 or 3 weeks, and you're on aeroplanes and hotel rooms, and you get to know them more in that 3 weeks than you would if you even lived with them, sharing a flat, roommates, whatever you call it.
Right.
Because I've lived in what we call bedsits here in England, where you have a 5-bedroom house and there's 5 or 6 different people sharing a house. Now the thing is, you can live with someone like that for 6 months or a year and not really know them as well as if you traveled with them for just 3 weeks, because when you're in a bad mood, you just go to your bedroom and close the door. When you want some privacy, and also you go out to work and you're apart for most of the time, you might just cross paths in the kitchen or something in the evening when you're making dinner or whatever it is. But when you travel with someone, you're with them 24/7 for however long, 21 days, whatever it is. And you share hotel rooms, you're at breakfast, lunch and dinner, and if you're in a bad mood, you can't just you still have to sit across the dinner table with them or whatever it is.
Yeah, you can't hide it. You can't hide your personality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you travel, especially in the Middle East, and especially in the 90s, you get into sticky situations no matter who you are, especially with groups as well.
Yeah.
People that aren't used to traveling and so forth. And there are times when, you might need to give an excuse or what the world might call a white lie to an official.
Yeah.
Or to say a taxi driver or whatever it is. So I know things, when people say that Ron Wyatt was a liar, I know and I appreciate that no one else knows this as well, perhaps as much, but I know he wasn't a liar, because I would see him in, say, a sticky situation at a border, the Israeli border crossing, or something, where they just interrogate you. And I could see how he just wouldn't lie about the purpose of his visit, or who financed his visit, or all these questions they ask you. And etc., etc. I just, in those days, you didn't have the phones that we have today, where I could be having a private conversation on my phone on WhatsApp, and you wouldn't know it if you're sitting across the table from me. In those days, if he was going to call his wife or call a colleague or whatever, I'd hear the whole conversation, because I'd be in the hotel room. And so I got to know him very well. And there's, I just can't explain it. I know he wasn't a liar. Even one of his worst critics said to me, he said, this critic didn't believe in the Ark of the Covenant discovery, but he knew Ron very well. And he said, I don't believe the Ark of the Covenant's there, but there's one thing for sure, Ron believed it was there. And what he meant was, he knew that Ron wasn't lying, because he knew that Ron wasn't a liar, because he knew him so well. But he couldn't work out how the Ark of the Covenant couldn't be there. But Ron said it was there, and he knew he wasn't a liar. So he had this sort of dilemma. And I saw Ron time and time again helping strangers, helping people, and as I already said, his kind behaviour and so forth. All the arguments about him being in it for the money were just absurd to my mind, because I would see him time and time again. An offering would be taken from the congregation, it would be handed to him, and he would just say, maybe, I don't know, maybe a couple of £100 or whatever. It's probably quite a lot in those days. And he would just say, well, why don't you guys keep it? The organisers or the church or whatever. Why don't you guys keep it to cover your costs? People would say, oh, do you mind if we copy your videos? And he'd say, yeah, sure, there's no copyright. Once he found out that someone had asked not to copy them, but to pay that person instead, and he was a little bit perturbed by that. He said, we're not meant to be copyrighting these things. We give them away for free. And in fact, at that time, I bought 2 video recorders and hooked them up and used to copy his videos like en masse. He would be running all day long. I just give them away for free to people. And I told him I did that, and he said, well, good. And when I went to his home, and I was there for several weeks in Tennessee. I'd see the way he lived, the car he drove, the clothes he wore. He just really was not ostentatious, decadent type of man. He just, you can tell when someone's interested in money and how they gear their whole ministry. If it's geared towards making money. And I just know, I appreciate that other people didn't travel and visit him in his home, but I for sure know he was not a liar. He was not in it for the money. He was certainly not in it for the fame, because his humility comes through even if you see him on a video. I just saw nothing but 100%, I can say unreservedly, 100% genuinity in his character and in his ministry.
And I think maybe your testimony here of who he was is very important, because when someone makes a claim like he has to have found the Ark of the Covenant with Christ's blood on it, Jesus does say that we should look at the fruits of the person who shares something, and we're actually instructed to look at the messenger and check him up with the Bible, sort of to test him, to see if he bears the fruits of the Spirit. And so that is part of that is part of the investigation when someone makes such a claim.
It's also everything should be factored in, as you say, and it's even just the more subtle things, like you can, maybe not when you're, some people, they can just read other people better than others, and you can just tell if someone's attention seeking, if their eyes light up when they get a compliment, or that kind of thing. If they say all sorts of things just to solicit a response, like searching for praise or looking for compliments. We all know that there's different types of people out there, and he just never exhibited any kind of behavior, even outside of his ministry work. Just if you're just sitting on a plane or a bus or something, he was never the type to be big-headed, egotistic, and search for compliments, or if he just really wasn't like that. There's no way he was in it for the ego trip or the fame or anything like that. And I think it might have actually been you or someone that once said, if someone was looking for fame, they certainly wouldn't make a claim that they'd found the Ark of the Covenant and then not be able to offer any physical evidence, because you're not going to get fame, you're just going to get ridiculed. So that's absurd to me.
Of course, there's a lot of people who think that maybe he was mentally unstable and that he believed he believed it, but it wasn't true, And from my personal experience, I actually last time I was in Israel with him, I actually worked at a psychiatric treatment center. So I faced people with a lot of different mental disorders every single day, and when I was traveling with Ron, I noticed something about him that to me proved that he does not have a mental illness. And that's because everyone with a mental illness or who are mentally unstable, if they're pressed up against a corner, or if you get in a situation, then it will always show. Because someone who's mentally unstable, they are not able to hide their problems when they get pressed into a situation, when they get tired, or different situations. They can't hide it, and so you will always be able to tell when someone is in a pressured situation if they are mentally unstable.
I see.
And I never saw that. With Ron.
I never did. And actually, I'm sure when I was at your ministry once, I'm sure it was Ellen that pointed out, if you are a liar, the people that really know you are your family. And his sons and his widow and all of his family and his closest people, they all believed the discoveries. And none of them were making any money out of it or anything like that. I mean, how do you make money out of these things? And actually, they're the ones that believed. So, if he was a liar, for example, his wife would have known it. She wouldn't believe these things. So it was just a testimony to me that the people closest to him all believed him, supported
him. And so what was I? Well, you also, if we're going to continue, I know you also were among very few to visit Jebel al-Laws in Saudi Arabia. So what was that like?
Yes, true. That was just an amazing experience. When was that? It was, do you remember? Was it 2000? I got a feeling
I don't remember.
2000. Okay. Anyway, I think it was the year 2000. I remember it was May, and basically I was with Lennart Møller in that summer, or in the previous summer. Anyway, I was at Lennart Møller's doing some work at his house, and he said to me one day, what do you think your chances are of going to Jebel al-Laws, Mount Sinai, Saudi Arabia? And I just said, well, 50-50, I guess. I mean, if I go, and if I don't, I don't. I didn't really have any expectations of it. But I guess at the time he was working on organising a trip there. And so maybe he was considering bringing me along at the time. But I do remember when I was diving on the Egyptian side of the Red Sea, and you can look across to the Saudi side, it's not very far. And I do remember praying, thinking that it was just impossible, because it was basically humanly impossible to get to Saudi Arabia as a tourist and to go to Mount Sinai. But I do remember praying, standing there, looking over, and just praying, Lord, if it could in any way be possible, I'd love to go to Mount Sinai and, there's some kind of eyewitness testimony of that discovery. And probably subsequently pretty much shelved that prayer and forgot about it because I didn't really believe it would happen. But of course, yes, it did. And I'm sure that was around May 2000. And yeah, that was quite a trip. Chance of a lifetime. I'll never forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you also, I think maybe I heard that you were there when they tried to measure the underwater bridge at the crossing site.
Yes. Now, that was a point of contention for many of the critics that,
Yeah.
it struck me that we would call it an underwater bridge, but it's just some loose terminology. And it seemed to me like the critics then expected to see, a perfectly almost like a human construction of an underwater bridge. But when we talked about an underwater bridge, we never actually meant literally something, we just meant pathway that was more shallow than the rest of the very deep and steep seabed. And it would perform the objective of a bridge in that you could walk across it. But no one really expected to be able to go down there and see this perfectly constructed bridge. But anyway, so we used the word bridge, but the Bible calls it a pathway, which is probably more technically accurate. Maybe we should have used that term. So it was contested so much, even though Ron produced, was it a bathymetric map or something of the time, and various satellite maps and so forth, and it clearly shows it, to my mind anyway. But still, oh yes, I remember how it started. There was a man, and I think it was someone from England, and he called up some authority, I forget now, and he said down the phone, is there an underwater bridge at Nuweiba that goes, from Nuweiba across to the Saudi side? Now, he was probably just talking to some secretary or, the person that answers the phone or whatever. But either way, you ask some random question like that, and they just said no. Can you understand my point? These people map the whole sort of world and the seabeds and everything, and you're going to ask about one specific area and is there an underwater bridge? And of course they don't know about one. And so they just said no. And so he goes, right, that's it. There's no underwater bridge. I checked with the authorities and all of that. But anyway, it's clearly shown in the maps. But I guess that wasn't good enough. So it was with Ross Patterson, and I forget the names of the other guys. But anyway, they hired a boat and had sounding equipment. And we managed to get fairly far across because you're obviously not allowed to go too close to Saudi, but we got further than we thought. And we managed to just go up and down, mapping this underwater pathway and the depths and the drop-offs either side and so forth and its location. And it is there. And if you dive there, you can see, if you dive in the right area, you can see where it drops off dramatically.
Okay.
And it's almost ominous, slightly scary when you're diving and you're just swimming along, and then it's all very shallow and very light, and the sea's very warm. And then as you go over the cliff edge, it's like when you're scuba diving, it's like you're flying, and then you're going over this edge. And it's suddenly becomes very dark, and you swim a bit deeper, and it gets very cold, it drops off very dramatically and very rapidly. And I've seen the drop off on both sides, both the north and the south side. So it's definitely there. It's in public maps. We've documented it personally, and I've seen it personally. So there's no doubting that's there. And I think Lennart Møller in his book actually documented the angle, the angle of descent along the pathway, and it was, very gradual, and he documents lots of background information on that. So that's a good source also to go to. So yeah, there's no doubt.
Yeah, because I know, for instance, in Norway, the critics, they've argued that that's not the case. There's no pathway like that there. That's one of the arguments. So you can personally confirm there is.
I mean, what do you do with these people when there's bathymetric maps, there's is it satellite imagery? You might know better than I, but anyway, if you go to our website, you can see the various maps and the imagery and so forth. It's all there, and that's not fabricated. That's all official data. What do you do with people when you show them that and they still say it's not there?
Yeah. Well, there's not much you can do.
Yeah.
I've seen they manipulate the maps. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen that, but they've been manipulating maps. So they're not very honest.
Yeah,
so what can you do about that? So did you? Yeah.
There's actually a 3D image that was created several years ago of the maps, and so it's easier to see it. But it is a pathway which is shallow enough, much more shallow than the rest of that, the rest of the sea there. It's just how clear can you be? Jesus said, "Though one be raised from the dead, they won't believe." And it's I don't know what else to do except show them that. Yeah, I don't know.
So did you take a diving license in order to dive in the Red Sea? You didn't have that from before, did you?
No, I never dived before. I did that just for that particular dive, and then subsequently we dived several times afterwards. So it must have been in 1996 that I learned to dive. And then the only place I ever dive is in the Red Sea. I haven't dived anywhere else in the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my experience is just limited to there. But, one thing, and this is several years ago now, and, you wish you could just record certain moments in your life to reproduce them to people. But I remember I was around at my dad's place, and he had the TV on, and it was some sort of travel program, holiday program. And they were actually doing the Nueva at the time, and the Sinai, along Sinai. And the commentary, they had some footage, underwater footage, right where we dive. And they were showing all the corals that we would, dive over and try to document. And I remember the commentator in this travel program, he said, these corals are so unique. You don't see these corals anywhere else along, the Sinai Peninsula. And he said he hasn't seen these kinds of corals anywhere else in the world. And so I just thought, even though I haven't dived anywhere else in the world, there's someone that has. And he's saying that these corals are really strange and unique and so forth. So, I just thought, I wish I had a video recording of that segment. But yeah, so I haven't seen lots of different corals and so forth, but they are quite unique. And I do remember diving with Mark Kranzberg, and he's dived a lot, and he's dived a lot in Australia and other places. So, and he said it's very unique. He hadn't seen corals like it, and he said it is almost like there's been an accident scene, and there's lots of different vehicle parts, and they've just crashed together and landed. I remember him saying that as well. So it's very interesting diving. I haven't been for a while.
Yeah, it's amazing. You really got a chance to experience a lot of things firsthand. So I just want to, for those listening, you can see pictures of Aaron at Mount Sinai, and I think also maybe you diving on your webpage. That is covenantkeepers.co.uk. That's right.
Yeah, I think so. I had a couple of different domains. This website was set up like 20 years ago. The domain that I always use is archeofthecovenant.co.uk. But yeah, Covenant Keepers, is also one of them. It's the same website,
and you
just have a couple of different domains.
All right, and it's also called Wyatt Archaeological Discoveries, isn't it?
No, it's called wyattarchaeology.com. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's good that we get that straight.
True.
So for everyone listening, you should really go and look at these sites. They're really good web pages with a lot of information. And as you can hear, Aaron has firsthand information from these places, which is rare. There's not a lot of people who have had the chance to do what he has had the chance to do. So definitely go to his web pages. And so to continue, do you feel the work has taken a shift from when Ron was alive, or what are your thoughts now? It's been a lot of years since he passed away.
Yeah, he died in August of 1999, I think. So what's that? 20 years ago. You know, it really did change as soon as Ron passed away. It took a few years for me to really realise it, and we carried on diving several times after he died, but never really found anything. In fact, never really found anything new or anything different. I know there's lots of people that have tried to continue the field work, and I was one of them for a few years after Ron passed away. Don't really think anything particularly new, as far as I know, and I'm probably not really the one to ask. I'm not really in touch with what's going on, but I'm not sure anything particularly new in the field has actually surfaced. Nothing major anyway. I mean, it's great that different people want to go there and see it for themselves and tell their friends and family about it, take pictures, etc. Make videos and document things, that kind of thing. But for example, Ron, I don't think he felt he had finished working on the Tower of Babel. I didn't see, I think a couple tried, even I wanted to, but nothing really materialized out of that. There's a couple of projects he had in mind. I don't think they ever came to fruition through anybody else. And as we dive, we got to rediscover and redocument certain things, certain wheels down in the Red Sea and this kind of thing. But nothing really major ever happened after Ron died in the field. So after several years, I thought that probably God had done everything he wanted to do in that respect through Ron. And there wasn't, so to speak, there wasn't going to be another Ron Wyatt to do that kind of thing. It's just my personal opinion. I may be wrong, but it seemed like work at that point was meant to have taken a slightly more studious or academic approach, where the discoveries in the field were now documented, and it was time to preach them, to tell the world what they mean, to understand the Ark of the Covenant discovery more. And I dare say even more than Ron did. The Ark of the Covenant discovery definitely has a future, obviously. And it needs to be understood by the world and by Christians. So I think,
So it seems a bit like that Ron presented enough evidence to get people's attention in the way that if they were open to the Holy Spirit's guidance, they would continue. But if they weren't open, they would just try and ruin the evidence that he had presented, and it wouldn't help to get too many other
so you mean,
I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Just trying to understand. So you mean you think you're saying maybe God had fulfilled his purpose enough through Ron Wyatt's work, and then
Yeah, but
So he didn't need to uncover any more evidence or artifacts. He just needed to get the message out. You mean that?
yes, sort of, because we see that with Jesus. I was just looking at it the other day. We see Jesus; he does a lot of miracles, right? He heals a lot of people, and he had just fed I don't know several thousand people. So he had
Mm,
done a lot of signs and showed them a lot
mm,
of things. And then you see this scene where the Pharisees and the scribes, they come up to Jesus and they say, "Well, give us a sign and we will believe."
true.
And then Jesus says to them, because he could have given them another sign, but the thing
Yeah.
is that Jesus had given them enough signs, and they still
Mm,
asked for more because they weren't really willing to believe. And then Jesus say to them that I'm not going to give you another sign than the sign of the prophet. And then he refers to the Bible, right? The book of Jonah, and he
mm,
says that prophecy is the only extra sign I'm going to give you. Um,
mm.
which I think is an interesting approach because Jesus could have removed all doubt, but
And,
he didn't.
yeah.
So
And actually,
he
even
gave
the
them enough
signs,
to believe.
yeah, and even the signs and miracles that he did do, and they did
Yeah.
see, and they did admit were true. They just said, "Are you doing it by the power of the devil anyway?" They discredited it anyway. So you're right. What's the point? I mean, Ron always said God will give a certain amount of evidence, enough to convince the open-hearted and the honest.
Hmm.
And then at that stage, what's the point in bombarding you with just evidences after evidences? So yeah, after
Yeah,
Ron
because
passed, I did see the work change. Change, yeah. Mm,
I think if God had removed all doubt, um, then he wouldn't have, he could easily remove all doubt. He could have angels coming from heaven and announcing this is true, and but he doesn't. He wants, because then he gets the service of fear, and he wants
mm,
people to be guided by the Holy Spirit and have a true conversion. He wants people to love the truth when they hear it, and the only way that God can make that happen is he if he lets there be some amount of doubt so that those who are not sincere can actually choose doubt if they want to. I
mm.
don't know. It was my
Yeah,
opinion. Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, God doesn't use force, and He won't force you to believe in Him or force you to love Him. And
Mm,
so, if He was just to bombard you with evidence when you don't even want it, you're clearly by your behavior demonstrating that when he does give evidence, you reject it, or you say it's by the power of the devil, or, like we said, you show
mm,
someone a map of an underwater pathway, and they just say, well, it's not
right.
there. Things like that.
Yeah. Mm,
Why should God do any more? And he's not a God of force who, just so yeah. I think probably, as far as I can tell, the archaeological evidences were all I say done and dusted to be colloquial, um, by the time Ron Wyatt passed away. And then, yeah, at
mm,
that time, I think the discoveries just deserve um, investigation and basically preaching to spread the word, so to speak.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot of light on the Ark of the Covenant. Actually, you've produced some good material on the theology and the theological understanding and the message of the Ark of the Covenant. And I think the Ark of the Covenant obviously has a future, because
Yeah.
Ron said that when the Mark of the Beast law is passed, that's when the tables of stone and good clear video of the Ark of the Covenant would be made public and be put on public display. So we know that obviously it has a future. Um, but as for the
Yeah.
others, I kind of thought that they had done their job. Now it's just up to people to spread the word, so to speak.
Mm. So how can we use these so sort of rocks from the past to give a living testimony today? So we just don't, so that we don't end up just pointing to rocks. How can we make it a living testimony to reach people? Because you were reached through this in the beginning, like you just told. So how do you think one should go about?
The only one that can read all the different people's hearts. How many people on the planet now? 7 billion or something, I don't know. The only one that can read every single heart is God. And the Holy Spirit can influence their hearts, and the Holy Spirit can influence your heart as you speak to them and present these things, and how to present them to reach that individual. So the only thing you can do is pray,
Right.
and every morning dedicate your day to God, in your life to God, and ask Him to use you to reach others, and to say the right thing at the right time. Pray for divine appointments to meet people who you can witness to, and then have the wisdom to know what they're interested in and what will really grab their hearts. But as I said, these discoveries, these rocks, they were divinely crafted to reach several different types of people. As I say, there's all different parts out there, and these are so interesting, so fascinating. And they're epic stories. Most people know. So yeah, they do have the ability to cut across borders and boundaries and cultures and age groups and everything, just reach almost any type of person that's slightly interested. And as I say, I was actually hostile. But these things can still reach across all those borders and parameters to reach the majority of people if they have an amount of interest in them. So, yeah, it's really just to pray and ask God what's the best way to do it.
Yeah. So, thank you. It was very nice to hear your story. You have a very fascinating story. And thank you for doing this podcast with me. I really appreciate it. I think it's very important that people hear other people's experiences and testimonies. The gospel is supposed to be preached as a testimony, because I think it's people's stories are important to inspire others and give other people hope. Do you have one last message you want to share, or something you want to say?
Yeah.
Last advice?
I suppose that these things, while they're all very interesting in and of themselves, it doesn't stop, as you said, it doesn't stop at the rocks. God isn't interested in just putting on entertainment for us, where we look at the discovery of Noah's Ark, and even if we believe it, that we just walk away fascinated and interested and then carry on with our lives. God isn't redundant in His purposes, and He wants us to look at these things and try to understand what the God in heaven is trying to tell each and every human being on planet Earth. He sees you as if you were the only being in the world. He treats you as if you were His only son or His only daughter. And he has the ability to do that for all of us, which is sort of an oxymoron, but still, it's true. And He doesn't want us just to watch these videos and, see these things and even just believe them. He wants us to understand the message that He's trying to tell us, and the message that Jesus is coming back to earth soon. It's we're living in the end times, and end time events are fulfilling before our eyes. We see that the prophecies are coming true, and He wants us to study His word and to understand what will be the significant doctrines, the significant events at the end of the world, and how we are to respond to those things. The mark of the beast we mentioned earlier. It's a very important subject. We need to know what it is. There's these as each generation goes past and technology changes, the mark of the beast seems to change, just depending on what the technology of the day is. Once it was a supercomputer in Europe, in the 80s, and then suddenly we came up with microchips in our credit cards. So then suddenly it became a microchip in your hand. And all these things are completely ignoring the Bible text, which says if you keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, you avoid the mark of the beast. So the mark of the beast is directly intrinsically linked to the keeping of the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20. Hence, the Ark of the Covenant discovery, the tables of stone will be brought out and put on public display at the time of the mark of the beast law. These things we all need to pray about, consider our reaction and our behavior at this time. So yes, the parting thought would be, please understand the message of these discoveries, and particularly the Ark of the Covenant.
Okay. Thank you. And I think that people will see more about the message tied to the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant on your page. You have many videos and a lot of content there. So please check out his web pages. And thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much. I do too. Appreciate you.